I'm your host, Zach Moss, and I'm working on my PhD studying the psychology of extremism as well as security policy. There's a statistic that I found to be uniquely disturbing by an individual named Magali Barbieri. She is a professional demographer at university, and she had said that 60% of men in the US from 20 to 40 years old die from drug overdose, and that doesn't also include suicide. And I think what we need to understand is, why is this happening at the rates that it is? And what is the psychology behind this? Because these people are clearly hopeless enough to want to medicate, regardless on whether or not they intended for there to be an overdose. But first, I think it is important for us to have a comparative perspective on just how bad this is. Most of us know how bad it was when the fall of the Soviet Union happened in the 90s. Its economic repercussions had radiated throughout the world and had affected Eastern European countries in particular. Well, the fall of the Soviet Union had led to the same decrease in life expectancy in Eastern Europe as overdoses in the US had affected the US life expectancy. Most of us also know the impact of AIDS around the world. Well, would you be surprised if I told you that the impact of AIDS on specific countries in Africa had decreased their life expectancy the same as drug overdoses have decreased the life expectancy of American citizens? And so what we need to understand first is, what is the demographic of the people who are affected? Well, it's high school educated, blue collar, mostly white men in middle of America. There's many different ways that we could approach this situation from a psychological standpoint, whether it be the economic influences that have led to their hopelessness, the political ramifications, the cultural exclusions and inclusions that are happening around the world. But first, it's important to acknowledge the fact that they're using fentanyl-based drugs because they're cheaper, higher in potency, and it's used to cut a variety of more expensive products to reap more benefit for the dealers. Well, first, if we are going to approach the psychology, we need to understand from an economic standpoint. There's something called post-materialism that happened about the 70s to 80s all the way up to modern day. And that's where you have a reprioritization in society in the West, specifically in the US, where people began to focus mostly on identity and self-expression over materialism. Well, there's a hypothesis out there called cultural backlash. Technically, it's a theory. I think it's more of a hypothesis based off of the amount of evidence, but nonetheless, it is believed that conservatives right now are fighting back against the prioritization of society, where they believe that material well-being, economics is still more important, and as a result for them, when there is, say, economic impoverishment, they take it to heart a lot more often. And what we see in a lot of these different states and societies is that the type of economic impoverishment is so internalized that we can measure from the point of unemployment onwards the life expectancy of males and males die significantly faster if they're unemployed than females. One of the reasons for that is that they believe that they're a failure, they can't provide for their family, and they engage in more risk-taking behaviors such as drugs. We also know that these individuals are in more labor-intensive positions, and as a result, they self-medicate for pain that they can't get essentially medical help from as a result of either poor or a lack of healthcare altogether. And so you have people who are physically hurting and mentally hurting, economically hurting, and the only way that they can fight back is through political engagement. But they also feel like they're politically disenfranchised, which is where we have the increase in populism on the right, because they feel as though that they are the losers of economic development in a globalized system, where they believe that the elites are taking their jobs are reducing, there's immigrants taking their benefits, which is why they don't have health care. And I'm not here to say whether or not any of this is the case, but rather instead I'm here to express the mindset that these individuals have. And so they believe that they are losers from a political standpoint because they're disenfranchised. There's everything against them. They're trying to fight back economically and politically, but they can't. They can't support their families, and they engage in more risk-taking behavior. As a matter of fact, we can even measure the amount of risk-taking behavior across both males and females from above and below the poverty line. And what we know is that individuals below the poverty line are more likely to engage in risk-taking behavior, and it also amplifies if they are male. And that's where you have drugs. In addition to that as well, they believe that they're culturally estranged as a result of the fact that their role in society as white males have changed as well. And so this leads to a sense of hopelessness because they can't advance in any facet of life sometimes, whether it be economically, like I said, politically, socially. And so they don't know what to do, and they're hurting. And I think that regardless of what our political outlooks look like, we need to acknowledge that people are hurting enough to where they're engaging in behavior that leads to their death. As a matter of fact, I have experience with one individual who I grew up with, who I worked out with. He got married at a young age, and he died of an overdose. His wife woke up. She rolled over. He was dead. She was pregnant. She was going to give birth in a few weeks to their son, and now he no longer has a father. This person was approximately 24 at the time of the death. He had his whole life ahead of him. Now he's dead. It amazes me that the media doesn't even cover this. For something this severe. We're constantly focused on what's going on around the world, and we're focused on the U.S.'s role around the world sometimes, but we're not focused on the U.S.'s role in helping people that need help. And this is something that we need to acknowledge.